Good evening. Welcome to the Africans in America podcast. With me is Wuruche Uzoka.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. Today, we want to discuss something that affects Africa. We as African immigrants are very aware of an organization called USAID. But the Trump administration decided to shut down USAID due to concerns about corruption and inefficiencies. This is an organization that for over 60 years has had programs running in several countries in Africa. In fact, in recent years, as much as $1.2 billion were budgeted to Ethiopia for different economic development programs, healthcare programs, empowerment programs, and programs in support of democracy. The beneficiaries of the USAID intervention in Africa are plenty. Almost every country in Africa has some form of USAID programs running, mainly in healthcare, mainly in empowerment of local small businesses. We all know USAID. In fact, USAID was formed mainly for Africa. If we can look back at it 60 years ago, when the African continent was just beginning to have a lot of newly independent countries, and then President Kennedy tried to do something for Africa. So now with this intervention by Trump, by this dissolution of USAID, we want to now wonder. There's been a lot of cry and hue and cry about how it affects projects in Kenya, a lot of projects, ongoing projects in Ethiopia, projects in Congo Democratic Republic, which is incidentally is the second largest recipient of USAID funds. So today we want to delve deep into it. But before we go into that, we should know that USAID also has other broader activities they do, which sometimes they are criticized for in Africa, especially as regards to their influence on trying to push liberal agendas, which Africans don't particularly like, and also their attempts at regime change when they don't like a regime that is not in favor of America, they want to change them. But before then, let us start now. Wuruche, what do you think? How do you think this program, this particular shutdown of USAID by President Trump and Elon Musk is going to affect Africa?
Okay, so it's going to be in two parts. I'm going to speak about the cons, and then I'm actually going to speak about the pros, because sometimes you want to play devil's advocate. I do not agree to the way they're going about it, but I will speak about the pros to it. So now, one of the major cons is that it's going to leave a lot of organizations desolate. It's going to leave them like without funding to continue their projects. A lot of well-meaning projects are going to need to be abandoned. And when you think of it from the perspective of the work that's being done, like when you think of the AIDS research that has gone on over the years, and the funding towards AIDS to help Africa, because I think we had one of those regions that was really struck with AIDS and all that. And, over time, a lot of these programs have assisted in many different ways. So I even look at it first from the one of the major cons is the health projects that have depended solely on funding. It's going to affect them. And also I think the way at which it's withdrawn, the way it's taken away is what's destructive about it. What's damaging about it is it you don't just pull funding like that. You don't just eradicate. You give people time. There
Mm-hmm.
has to be a time period that you can say, okay, within this time to this time, this is what's going to need to happen, et cetera, et cetera. Get ready for it. And then everybody will do what they can to mobilize however it is they want to figure out funding, and all of that. So it's negative. It's going to have a lot of negative, like a heavy negative reflection on even America, Because what's going to happen, what I imagine happening is that a lot of those organizations are going to move to China, Asia to get fund, even Russia to get funding. It is what it is. At this point, it's about, needing the money. It's not going to look good or be good for America. So it's negative across the board, not just for the recipients in Africa, right? The actual beneficiaries. It's going to affect a lot of, even alliances are going to be affected
Mm.
because people just have to do what they have to do to keep the work going. So this is where, this is where I see it. I see it going.
Okay, but now we know that we've had a lot of engagement with USAID. Every country in Africa wishes for USAID funds. But what do you think about all these other criticisms of, especially these ones that are coming out now, that USAID was really deep in regime change by
Mm,
only funding opposition newspapers they call liberal newspapers. We in Africa, we always know that during election times,
mm,
we are victims of the big powers. Parties, apart from the local things where they fight for them due to tribes and due to religion, they are also fighting due to affiliations or perceived affiliations to America and to Russia
mhm,
and to China and all that.
mhm,
And in this regard now, USAID has been seen to be funding a lot of journalists. Especially, I can remember that when I was a journalist in Nigeria, USAID used to have programs where they invite journalists, certain journalists, they call them pro-democracy journalists to the American embassy, and they alone had access. And even though in Nigeria we know this big thing with brown envelopes we don't know what kind of funding they have. All these NGOs they rolled out, pro-democracy NGOs, pro-human rights NGOs that ultimately challenge governments, undermine governments in Africa, especially in Africa. They undermine governments and all those things. So what do you think? Do you think because of
mhm.
this closure now that this is a good thing for Africa? At least now democracy can we'll know that the American agendas are not being pushed into our political space.
Okay, so I'm going to come from a human rights perspective, okay? It is the job of journalists, it's the job of human rights defenders to challenge the government. Okay, we have to challenge the government. So I'm always going to stand in favor of what you might look at as the funding being given to those organizations and groups to challenge the government. I'm going to look at it as that's what you expect in a free and fair democratic space. That's what to expect is that people should not be afraid to challenge the government. Trump at this time happens to have been the government at some point. He's coming to be the government. So he has to have issues with legacy, what he calls legacy media. He has to have issues with journalists. It's just the way it's gonna be. Because the journalists challenge him. They ask him those tough questions. They ask him those things that he clearly doesn't do right. And so I don't expect him to be happy. Exactly what's playing out now is what we fight against. They're punishing groups that oppose them. Think about it. They're punishing groups that dare to stand up to criticize the government and say, this is where you guys are failing. This is not. And so US aid, of course, they're doing their job when it comes to what you call funding those journalists. I see it as keeping democracy alive, keeping the place balanced. Somebody has to do that job. You cannot allow for governmental overreach. It's not allowed. That's why journalists, they respect journalists because journalists don't care much about the money. I don't know about today's journalists though, but journalists don't care much about the money. It's about upholding truth. It's about upholding truth. So it's always very interesting and I found myself in that spot when I ran for office and when I it's always very interesting when you're a journalist and you need to challenge the government, and then in my case, try to be part of the government. You know what I mean? It puts you at a very funny thing. But the role of a good journalist, an ethical journalist, is that you challenge no matter what. And so, yes, it's okay for USAID to have gone out there and created opportunities or funding for pro-democratic positions. Now, what I do want to say though, and it does sound funny, is that the positive side of this is the fact that we're going to sit up as African nations. Is it going to take time? Yes, it's going to take time to survive the non-funding. But what it ends up doing is we slowly take power away from these groups that swoop in and give funding and sort of have us do their bidding.
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying?
that's one of the topics I want to ask
You want to
about. Where
address. Okay,
if
I
you
should wait for
think
you to bring it
no,
up.
I wanted to ask. We will explore it later. I mean, like, is aid dependency good for Africa in the long run?
No, it's not.
Is it good for Africa? Is depending on aid for economic development, for infrastructural development,
No.
aid given by USAID or by the Chinese or by the Russians who have
Mm,
their own agendas and their own strings attached. But before that,
sure.
we have also come to find out that USAID is very involved in pushing liberal agendas and supporting NGOs that do things like gay rights, LGBT rights, um, all the rights of those liberal rights that are really anathema in many African countries. Yeah. Do you think this will be missed in Africa?
What will be missed? The aids that they're giving will be
The
missed.
aid to the gay rights people, the all those rights of all those rights
Yeah.
that are challenging to the sensibilities of a normal
Uh,
African person.
yeah, I mean the average African, African will probably not miss that when it comes to that because they're judgmental. They also fear for their lives because the government actually threatens to put them, imprison them, and then also the Sharia law, where people once they're caught are either killed or dismembered and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So no one, even if someone supports, they're wise not to be obvious about it or be vocal about it just for self-preservation reasons, right? So that part of it might not be missed in that regard. But when it comes to again those health care
yeah,
programs
yeah,
that heavily depended on
yeah,
on
yeah,
the funding, you could tell that
yeah,
there's no way it won't be missed. It will
yeah.
100% be missed. But when we tie again into this conversation, the fact that we need to depend on ourselves, like I was speaking yesterday about, or a couple of days ago about Dambi Somoyo's book called Dead Aid, right? Dambi
Mm,
Somoyo is that economist from Zimbabwe, Dead Aid, and how Africa has depended way too much on foreign support. When we tie it into it, I think it's the beginning of our self-reliance. It's the beginning of this is going to see the beginning of us. Well, it's not going to be the beginning because we've been doing it, but it's going to see the fact, we're going to have to depend on ourselves, and then the givers of the aid will have to their power will have to be taken from them because there's a little bit of power when you receive, and so that power has to be taken away from them, and then I guess a balance will come in the future. I guess I just see a balance happening. Yeah, it's gonna
yeah,
be tough at first.
this LGBT, these liberal agendas have been a problem. My dogs are howling. Funny enough.
Like mine are the quiet ones.
Yeah, for the liberal agendas have caused some African countries some real problem because they tie it to aid and they tie it to IMF loans and they tie it to
Yes.
support for in something. So countries like Uganda and some
Hmm.
other countries are suffering a lot, and most of that pressure is being put on them
Yes.
by NGOs and these NGOs we're talking about.
Hmm.
Okay. But going now to that question, do you think Africa should that should make them more self-reliant and move away from aid? Because
So you said,
this
do you
we
think
have
Africa?
HIV in Africa. We need USAID to help us intervene. We have a guinea worm. We need USAID. We have measles. We have childhood diseases. They
Yes,
are
yes,
running all these things. And even
yes.
when women need microfinance for markets in Balogun, in
Mm-hmm.
Makola,
Mm-hmm.
in even the markets in Kenya, we need
Yes.
USAID small support and grants. Shouldn't we be doing, our governments be doing more for the people?
Oh, obviously now our government has been, we've needed them to do so much more
You're
from
muted.
from
You're muted. I
forever.
can't hear you.
I'm not muted.
I can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear
Did
me?
you get muted?
No. So as I was saying, when you think of what like Dambisa Moyo said about the need for us not to depend on aid as much, right? I started to wonder like what would she say in a situation like this? Like what would she come up with, like when it comes to how it's being handled now. But yeah, I really don't know. But when you think of the geopolitical consequences of this can trigger so much like again uh, the organizations moving to Africa, moving to, I'm sorry, Russia, China, to
Russia,
get their
China, right?
money.
Okay.
Yes, to get their money. And, it's going to undermine the American business. Definitely. It's
Yeah,
going to
but
undermine
but
everything to do.
this question of aid for Africa has become a very serious one now. Some people feel
Mhm.
that aid is undermining Africa, is underdeveloping Africa, it's not allowing
It's
Africans to be
been,
innovative, to do things for themselves because they just wait on aid. And
yeah.
some countries depend more on aid than others. And like you
Mhm.
have said, if America stops giving aid, Russia moves into filling the gap. And if Russia stops filling it, the Chinese moving. The Chinese are already there, though, although they don't give aid in the way that Americans do.
Mhm.
In Abuja, when I was there, they were building hospitals, they were
Mhm.
building labs, they do concrete structures that
Mhm.
benefit the community. They don't give to NGOs, they give to the to the governments and build these facilities that more people benefit from. They too also do their own aid. They are all using it for soft
Yes.
power, so that they can have influence on in the United Nations. They can have influence. The Chinese have used this their aid in building ports, in building
Mhm.
infrastructure to meander and get into the African community.
Mhm.
Maybe this thing with the USAID will make the American government rethink how it engages with Africa in trying to build soft power. Because for the
Yeah.
for the Chinese, their own vehicle for soft power is not to give you HIV drugs and if this thing. Their own is to build a port for you, build a hospital for you, help you build your rail systems, help you put your infrastructure. They do a needs
In place.
analysis, and those kind
Mhm.
of interventions are more longer lasting. They are more
Mhm.
impactful. They
Mhm.
and so maybe America will rethink their own. I think USAID is still very useful to Africa.
I
I
believe
think
so. I,
yeah, I think they may need to re-engage it. They say this is a 3-month moratorium. They are blocking it for, although we hear USAID may be closed. I think it's now part of the federal government here, the foreign
mm,
affairs department, foreign
mhm.
ministry. But America will need to reevaluate how it gives aid and all that, and who it gives aid to, and all
Mhm.
that, and how it
Mhm.
engages with Africa as regards to aid. Maybe instead of giving NGOs and this, build hospitals, build
Correct.
things, do things the way the Chinese are doing, the way the Russians are doing, and all
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yes. It's
This
definitely
topic
going to
is
be
still
different.
unfolding. We will continue to
Talk
explore it. We
about
will
it.
continue to
Yes.
expand
I,
on it.
mhm. I personally think that, what these two wealthy men are doing is they're trying to think again along the lines of nationalists, people who are pro their own agenda, their country, and don't
Yeah.
really see the need. That's who they are. That's how you accumulate wealth too, if you really think about it. It's mostly about like just yourself. And so that's kind of what you're seeing play out. Again, I like Elon Musk's work, but I do not like what he has, unraveled to be at this time. His work seems to be something that I don't even know if he even has a role in government, or he should have a role, because it's really
Yeah.
like not
He's
what
doing
a
something
person.
noble. Nobody has done this in government at all before.
Yes,
Many
and
have
it's not.
tried, but they didn't even get anywhere as near as what he has done.
Yeah, and the question is, to what benefit? Who's benefiting from all of this? Because clearly a lot of people are suffering from it. Like, for instance, the fact that they're going to attempt to clear out the federal houses and cut out jobs and have people have no jobs, right? Like, so, like, who's going to benefit? Why, who are you saving money for? And all that. So it's, yes, it's a very tricky situation. It puts everybody at risk. It puts even the United
Yeah,
States at
there's a
risk
lot of
because the
unease
power,
now. There's a lot of
yes,
unease.
they're losing their power by such acts, you know. And so that's it. That's really it. It's not a very fun conversation.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, we will explore other topics that are closer to us, yeah, as African immigrants in the coming editions of it, of
yeah,
the
no
Africans in
problem. This is a great
America.
topic. This is a really great
Yes,
topic.
yes, it
Yes,
affects a lot of people.
it affects
Mm.
everybody
USA
really.
should also look at us in Africa, in African immigrants in America, and find something. We need it. They shouldn't be taking everything to Africa.
That's
Where are the African immigrants?
funny.
Come and get your own. So we too,
That's
they
funny.
should find a program for diaspora Africans. It is
I'm sure
much
they
needed.
have. I'm sure they actually have. I'm sure they have a
Yeah,
ton of programs.
because
The
if
question
you
is,
look
do we
at it, the
really need
diaspora
it?
Africans send a lot of remittance. So if they rehabilitate us here, we will be
Mhm.
able to help more back home.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's very interesting. Yes,
anyway,
it's
we
very
we have come
interesting.
to the end of
Yes.
another wonderful edition of the Africans in
Hmm.
America
Sure.
podcast. Our subscription is growing, but it can do better. We urge you, if you like what we're doing, to subscribe and like, help the
Hmm.
algorithm to move our podcast up and let it be
Yes,
seen by
that'd be
more
great.
people. Share it
That would be
in
great.
whatever forum and medium you can share it with, WhatsApp, Twitter, TikTok, anyone,
Facebook.
Facebook. Encourage us so that we will continue to do more. We will explore more topics. We will expand it. This is a bigger, broader attempt to get the African immigrant community here to be more engaged with the African society back home.
Right.
So once again, thank you, Wuruche, for a wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful contribution to tonight's topic. We hope you liked our program. Subscribe, like, and share. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Yeah.